Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here today. My name is Parijat Sarkar. I'm a PM on Windows, and it's an honor for me to welcome Richard Schell to the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. A quick introduction for him. As the Wharton School's Thomas Garrity Professor of Legal Studies, Business Ethics, and Management, Richard Schell has won almost every teaching prize the school has to offer. He's also the author of many books, including the one he's going to be talking about today, Springboard, Launching Your Personal Search for Success. The book is based on his Wharton course, surveying what history's greatest thinkers have to say on the subject of success in life. I had the good fortune of taking the class back in my time in Wharton, and I have to say it was by far the most impactful class I've taken in my life. So I'm really excited that he's here to share those teachings with you today through his talk and through his books. So please join me in welcoming Professor Schell.
Thank you, Parijat. Thank you, and thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure to be here on such a beautiful day and to share some thoughts about one of my favorite subjects and to see if we can get you to have a few thoughts on this subject because the underlying theme of everything I'm going to say is that no one can tell you how to succeed. No one can tell you what success is because it is your journey, your definition, and your capabilities that are the secrets. One of the best-selling success books of the modern age is a book called The Secret. But I've read all the success books. If any of you, can come up with one I haven't read, I want to hear about it because I've spent the last 20 years or so reading every single one I can get my hands on. And having read them all, I can tell you for sure there is no secret. Although we all wish there was one. Wouldn't it be great if all you had to do was think a single thought and then everything would, light up? Doesn't work that way. So you have an assessment in front of you called the 6 Lives exercise. It's part of the talk. So I encourage you to take a minute and to review it. There's 6 little paragraphs, and they're just 6 stories. And the idea behind the assessment, which is in chapter 1 of the book, so it's just part of the book, is for you to read those 6 paragraphs and then rank those 6 lives from number 1 to number 6. Most successful, number 1, least successful, number 6. And the only rule is you can't have any ties. They have to actually have 6 different numbers. And a little later in the talk, I'm going to refer to this and ask you, who ranked which one, number 1 or number 6. And that might give us some interesting comments from you guys about what's going in your mind when it comes to this activity of conceiving of success. And I think you'll be interested to hear what some of your colleagues have to say about their choices. So if none of you have done the exercise, that part will be very short. So I hope that some of you can turn to it. Nothing I say here at the beginning is more important or more interesting than what you think about those 6 lives. So feel free to immerse yourself in that little exercise. It only takes about 5 minutes while I do my little setup here, and then we'll eventually get to the 6 lives. So, as Parijat said, my talk and my book is based on a course, and it's a course I've been teaching at Wharton since 2005. It's called The Literature of Success, and so it surveys all of the best success literature that I could come up with and has been modified and changed over those 10 years by the students. So currently, we read Aristotle, Plato, Epictetus, the Handbook for Life, the best-selling book of the Middle Ages, and work our way all the way up to Sotomayor's recent biography, the Supreme Court Justice, about her life, her memoirs. And in between, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Mary Kay Ash's Miracles Happen. And so it's really a course in challenging the students to come up with how they view all this literature, but at the end they have to write a paper. It's called my fill in the year. 2014 was this year's papers. My 2014 idea, a theory of success and how I plan to achieve it. And so I created this course because I was looking for what I would have wanted to take when I was a senior in college to help me think about these questions in a systematic way. And the goal of the paper is not actually to provide them with an answer, even for their own lives, because no one at 22 knows what success is, even after they've read all the books, right? But it is a reference point for them to look back on 10 years later and say, so that's what I was thinking about when I was a senior in college. And it also is, and I think this is the most important thing, and this is part of what I'll do in my talk, I try to help them learn to think about success for themselves, so that when they reach different points in their lives, different nodal points, different decision points, different stages of their lives, they'll have a bit more structure to what it is that the problem looks like that they're trying to solve, so they can solve it more wisely for themselves. So it's really not a course in what success is, it's a course in how to think about what success is. And that process changes. At each stage of your life, you will discover that you have different experiences you're bringing to that decision, different relationships that are part of your life when you make the decision, different knowledge that you now have that you didn't have earlier that you can bring to the decision about what success is. So you change your definition as you move through the years. And so how to think about it is much more important than having an answer, in my view. All answers are provisional. So this is the motivating question. Every one of us at different stages of our lives has to ask this question: what's next? And what's next for college grads is real easy. What's next is their first job. And they consider that a fairly momentous decision, the first job out of college. It actually turns out not to be that important. I once had a friend of mine, I'm from a small town in southwestern Virginia, Lexington, Virginia, and a friend of mine who's a doctor in town who I went to elementary school with, said, the most important thing to do after college is keep learning. And the first job is just another chance to do that in a different way. So I think that that's absolutely the case. But it still seems really important, since you've worked for, 16 years by the time you get to graduate from college, in doing only one activity mostly, taking tests, getting grades, that, hey, I've got to have, this is going to be it. I'm going to get my job and then life is over, done. One and done. But it doesn't work like that. So what's next is the question that this book is about and that my course is about. So how do you answer it? I've got 2 ways to help think about it. The book is divided in half. The first half asks you to consider, what for me does this word success mean? And there are different chapters that give different assessments, like the one you just took. And then the second half of the book is, well, having decided some thoughts about what success looks like, how will I achieve it? And the I is very important because everybody will achieve whatever their goals are in many different ways. Mostly the success literature tells us to do it the one true way. Visualize, set goals, network. I mean, there's a book for every tool. And of course, those tools are toxic in the wrong hands. I don't know about you, but I know some people who set so many goals every day, they don't have time to do anything else except set goals. And if that's the case, they shouldn't be setting any more goals, right? I mean, that's not the way to success for them. They need to do something else. And there's some people who can't help themselves. They network with everybody they meet on every elevator in the day, right? And so they really don't need a book on networking. They probably need something more on relationships and what meaningful talk looks like. So everybody's got different capabilities, different automatic success practices, but everybody's different. So the second half of the book has assessments and questions and things for you to sort of test out what are your special capabilities to lead you down the path that you want to go for yourself. We pick up, there's a big paradox when you start talking about success. We pick up most of our messages about what success is from outside ourselves. Schools, culture, media, family. But in the end, you have to define it for yourself. And so the separation of yourself from all that hypnotic messaging that came in at times when you weren't fully aware that it was even being put in is very difficult. Waking up, essentially, from the dream of your parents, of the media, of your culture, to define this word for yourself is not easy. It's almost as if you feel obsessively compelled to keep performing on metrics that you've been handed, and that, in a Pavlovian sort of way, you've been rewarded for achieving for a long time. Students, especially Ivy League students, are very practiced at a very narrow range of success practices. They learn how to take standardized tests. They learn how to sept out what a course is going to require to get an A, figure it out, perform to that, and then do it with the least amount of work, and then move on to something else. And it's sort of dangerous because when you've gotten really good at something as defined as that, what happens when you start choosing what employment to take? You start choosing employment that will reproduce that success system, so you'll be easily evaluated according to metrics that you can see around you, and then have that little charge that you're okay still because you're still checking boxes that others recognize. So getting away from whatever you've been rewarded for is hard. It takes work, thought. It helps to have friends helping you to do it with their similar commitment to doing it. So it's really important, and it's not easy. So why this book, and why am I so interested in this? Well, in my own life, I had what you might call a kind of complete breakdown of my success system in college. My dad was a general in the Marine Corps. He then had retired from that and was president of the Virginia Military Institute, which was his college. It's a military school in Virginia. His father had been a career military officer. My mother's father had been a career military officer. My sister had married a career military officer. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind where I was headed. I was headed for, I got to choose, Marines or Navy. That was about it. So for me, I never even gave it a second thought. I was raised in the service. We moved every year, and every single grade I was in, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, we were in a different place. From Hawaii to France to South Carolina, Norfolk. And it was just the way I thought everybody lived. And it was, just my world. So when it came time to go to college, I sort of broke the mold a little. I got into Princeton. So rather than go to Naval Academy, which was the prescribed journey, or VMI, which was, okay too, I got a Navy scholarship. So I got a Navy scholarship, free ride to go to college, join the ROTC, and march around on Fridays, and they paid for my education. And I would then be a career military officer. That was the deal. So everything was going great until my sophomore year, when the Tet Offensive in Vietnam was launched by North Vietnam. The United States escalated its commitment to the Vietnam War in a major way. And all of a sudden, all over America, campuses erupted in protests, demonstrations, all kinds of activities that called into question the war and the military. And so for the first time in my life, I was called to ask myself, what had I actually signed up to do? There was this sort of rude intrusion from the outside world that I didn't ask for that said, well, wait a minute, why are you doing this? What is it? What's involved in it? Are you okay with it? And when I came to think about it, which I had to do, I found myself between a rock and a hard place, because I came to the conclusion that I had no quarrel whatsoever with the Vietnamese people, and I had no interest in going over to kill them. So that was pretty easy to figure out. But then, on the other hand, I had my entire family legacy and my commitment with the scholarship, and my whole life was directed toward doing precisely what I now saw to be immoral. And so there was this just collision between the cultural norms that I assumed success looked like and the reality of what that turned out to be. And so after some long and difficult thinking, I decided to resign the scholarship and become a war resistor and a pacifist. Now, you can imagine the call when I had to tell my dad that I had made this decision. And it was a big moment for me. I wrote a little speech, I practiced it, and I made my phone call and explained that I was going to be turning away from my entire family history and join the war resistance movement. And he listened, and then he said, there's a little pause, and then he said 3 words, "Are you sure?" And I was absolutely not sure. There was no way any 21-year-old can possibly be sure that they're making a call that's going to be the right call about something like that. But I had to be sure with him that night, and so I said, yes, I'm sure. And that one word essentially cut the narrative cord of my life. I no longer had a past. I no longer had a story. I no longer had I wasn't the product of some journey that was going to continue into the future. It was almost like I'd parachuted into Princeton with no identity. And so it was like vertigo. And so from that day, for about 17 years, I had to think about it, to figure it out. It took a long, long time. I didn't start working as an assistant professor at Wharton without tenure until I was 37. So I took the long way around. But of course, because it was a long way around and because I had no choice but to do it, I learned how important it is to ask those questions and to go to the core of the answers for yourself and not try to put them off, not try to finesse them, not try to fake it, just go there and figure it out. So I became a social worker in Washington for a while. I was as an alternative service for the draft. I worked with poor families in condemned buildings. That, of course, was a second culture shock. I've gone from military to pacifism, and now I went from Princeton to the ghettos, and no one had prepared me for that disconnect. And I finally just gave up. It was all too much for me. And I had saved $3,000, and I got a one-way ticket to Greece and decided I would just travel and figure it out. And my only commitment to myself was that I won't come home until I figure it out. I'd stopped talking to my parents. I'd stopped communicating with anyone in my family. It was gone. And it was a tough time. So I took 2 years on this round the world trip. We just followed my nose, wherever it went, and ultimately discovered what I was looking for in a Buddhist monastery in Sri Lanka, where they welcomed people from the West. And I lived there for a while and was taught by a wonderful monk named Venerable Sivali, who gave me the opportunity to live a very different life, but one that really forced me to just observe what was really going on inside myself in a very disciplined way. And then went on to another Buddhist monastery in South Korea, where I actually met a Zen master who asked me if I wouldn't mind changing my journey and just stopping there and becoming a monk. So that was a career decision. Monk or home. I didn't still know what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I did have enough self-knowledge by then to know whether I wanted to be a monk or not. And the answer was, no, I needed to go home and straighten things out with my family. So I made my way home. My parents, God bless them, were both still living, which was a great miracle. They welcomed me home, prodigal son. They'd never stopped loving me, and I got to know them. So I'd left the country with a general and his wife as my parents, and I came to know a mom and a dad, and lived in the basement for 2 years selling insulation door to door in Rockbridge County. So I was about 29 by this time. So if any of you are like around 29 or younger, you're way ahead of me. So finally went to law school because there was something I could do to make money that was more interesting than selling insulation. And then discovered in the middle of law school something I would wish on anybody and everyone. It was a moment in time. Now, I'd earned it by this time. I'd been puzzling this question, what should I do? It was like a Zen koan to me. And I was sitting in a law school classroom at the University of Virginia with 150 students poised on the edge of their seats with a professor in the front telling us about the deep mysteries of contract law doctrine. And everybody was like this. And I was like this, waiting to raise our hands. And I had an out-of-body experience. I drifted over myself, and I looked down at myself, and I looked down at this classroom, and suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, I said, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to be that guy in the front of the room. So that's where I've been going ever since. How do I figure out how to be a teacher? And so I found a job at Wharton, made my way through the process. You're lucky enough if you have an academic career to invent what you do, especially at a great school like Wharton. So every course I now teach, I've made up. The success course, I majored in English in college. I'm a law professor. So I figured out how to teach an English course in a business school with a law degree. We read Death of a Salesman in that class. So why this book? Because I think it's so important for people to open the door to their own futures by thinking in a careful, systematic, personal, authentic way about who they are and what they ought to do. And it's worth the effort. And it's a hard subject because there's so many people who have the answer for you. But really the most important thing is to ask the question and then learn a little about how to answer it, not what the answer is. So we don't do much to help you guys in elite education. Emerson once said, Harvard teaches most of the branches of learnings, and Thoreau, his friend, said, yes, indeed, all the branches and none of the roots. And education really doesn't do much of a good job. Some do. At some of the Catholic universities like Notre Dame, they work pretty hard on helping people discover ideas about what their vocation ought to be. It's a kind of Catholic concept of vocation. But in most schools, they just hide this. It's relegated to career services, and you know about career services. There are nice people in career services, overworked, underpaid, and harassed. And all they end up doing is managing the information session for people like Microsoft and Google and Bain and McKinsey, so that all the recruiters are comfortable and all the students line up, and then that's all they can do. If somebody comes to them and says, "What should I do with my life?" the career people go, "Well, I don't know. Maybe you should go talk to the psychotherapist. They're down the hall." It's almost as if you're a pathology not to know what it is you want to do. But I'll tell you a secret. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And very few, 10%, 15% of students know what they want to do, really. They know what they're going to do. They know what they've been told to do. They know what everybody else wants to do, and so they want to do that. But they don't necessarily know what they want to do. And if you scratch them a little bit, they'll admit that they don't know what they want to do. But we haven't given them too many tools to help them get past that uncertainty, because right behind the door of uncertainty is a little pool of fear. And people close the door again. They don't want to go to the fear part. So at Wharton, we've got a new program we just started. About 300 MBA students are doing it now, where they themselves are facilitating groups. You could do it here. They take Springboard, they read a chapter a week for 8 weeks, 2 hours a week, talk to each other in a small group of 6 people, and share what they're really thinking, what they're really uncertain about, what they really ought to be doing. Experiment a little. Auden once said, "How do I know what I think till I see what I say?" So sometimes when you hear yourself saying something, I said that? Wow, that's interesting. Maybe that's what I should be thinking about. I have another corollary to that. How do I know who I am until I see what I do? How do I know who I am until I see what I do? So if you want to know who you are, just look at what you do every day. That's who you are. And guess what? You can choose to do something different. And then you will be someone else. So it's really a question of choice, action, and your identity follows. You don't have to have the identity all figured out in order to be something. Just do something different, and the identity will catch up with you. So here's a quick little diagnostic. We're going to do this and the 6 lives thing before I'm finished. But I think it's sometimes useful. Someone at Microsoft ought to design an app for this. It would be something that you could carry around with you, and on a given day, on a random moment, it would bing you to put your dot in one of these cells and ask you, well, how are you doing as far as achievement is concerned? And you get to rate yourself. And how are you doing as far as satisfaction is concerned? And you get to rate yourself. And then you get to see what you're dissatisfied with. Are you dissatisfied with your level of achievement? Are you dissatisfied with your level of satisfaction? And whatever you're dissatisfied with, that's the compass. Move in the direction of improving it. But notice there's always trade-offs. You can't have all of one without some missing part of the other. And so it's like navigating on water. You got forces that you have to manage at the same time to get you where you're trying to go. But it's a pretty good sort of waypoint taker. You can kind of point yourself. Well, I do this at Wharton, and I'll just give you a couple examples of what can happen to people, senior people, when they don't do this enough. Check to see whether they're on the right path. There's a program for senior executives called the Advanced Management Program, which has people from all over the world, about 55, a couple times a year. And I have a day with them on success. And I did it a few years ago, and there were a couple of people in the room who were actually honest enough, which I thought was kind of very open of them. And it's a good learning community, so they learned to be pretty candid. They put their dots here in the low satisfaction, high achievement cell. Very few people do. They always stick in these 4. And so I asked them, what's up with those two people? So one of them raised his hand and said, well, I'm the CEO of a major global 500 company. I'm the CEO, not of the whole company, but of North America. And so big responsibilities. I've achieved way past any expectation I ever had in my life about where I would end up. This is just, a wonderful gift that I have this position. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. Why did you put yourself here? Why low satisfaction? He said, well, as I was sitting here this morning thinking about this, I realized that for the last 3 promotions I've gotten, each one has taken me further and further away from what I actually love to do. And so here's someone who's in a career and has sold themselves to the career. It was either be promoted or leave. They didn't want to leave. They had other things that were keeping them there. And so they just kept promoting themselves away from satisfaction. It turns out he really loved logistics, efficiency, factories. And as he got promoted, he got further and further away from running anything that had anything to do with efficiency. And mostly it had to do with politics and regulation and corporate backstabbing and whatever goes on up there. So he wasn't a happy guy. So, his job was, okay, now I figured that out. Now that's dissatisfaction. Let's move myself in a direction where I'm closer to what I love to do. The other guy was 35 years old. He was the youngest lawyer in Argentina ever to win the prize the country gives to the best lawyer. So here's a very young person, top lawyer in Argentina. And I said, well, congratulations. It sounds like you've really, achieved notable success in your achievement category. Why so low in satisfaction? He said, well, it's pretty simple. I hate law. So now there's someone who's been rewarded for doing something that he has a talent for and get paid for, but he forgot about the enjoyment part. and just went down the trail of getting paid to do something you hated to do. And if you do that for a long time, you will burn out for sure. I mean, if you have a choice between a life of satisfying work and a life of work that you are good at that you hate, choose the lower paying satisfying work and you'll live longer. You'll be a better friend to people that need you. You'll be a better parent to children if you have them. You'll love better the partner that you've found. Life will work a lot better if you choose the lower compensation with a higher satisfaction than the higher compensation with, not lower, you have to hate law in order to get to this test, but don't leave satisfaction behind as a criteria. So that's just all of you are at different stages of your lives, but that's what can happen if you suddenly wake up one day and you're honest about it, what's really going on, and it's a wake-up call. So these two dimensions of success that the book talks about and that you really discover as soon as you open the lid and look in the box: outer success, achievement, recognition, celebrity, fame, fortune, and internal success, happiness. And of course, if you ask most people off the street, what do you mean by the word success? And without much thought, they'll say, well, it's happiness. I'm happy, I'm successful. But we'll see in a minute that that's really just shifting from one uncertain word to another, because happiness turns out to be just as hard to define as success does. So you haven't really solved the problem by simply saying happiness is the answer. You've just introduced a new puzzle. So we'll talk about that in a second. So external success. The problem with measuring yourself on this, and this is sort of famously known but seldom followed, is that it's always relative. Wealth is any income that is more than the income of one's wife's sister's husband. So doesn't that sort of give you a problem? If you're going to measure your success in wealth, then you better pick a poor community to live in, because you'll always be dissatisfied, because someone will have more than you. Hungry ghosts is another thing that can happen for people who are motivated by external rewards. The hungry ghost is a Buddhist deity. It's actually not deity is a glorious word. It's a Buddhist entity that's in an afterlife. And this is what you get to be reborn as if you live a life of shameless service to your own appetites. So you've been nothing but satisfying cravings all the way through your earthly life. And then you get reborn. And you get reborn as an entity with a body the size of an elephant and a mouth the size of the head of a pin. And so for the rest of eternity, you try to feed yourself with this tiny little mouth and this gigantic body, and you can never, ever cure the torment of hunger. Pretty brutal. But think about it. I'll bet you know some of these people already. Hungry ghosts are people who wake up every day and they have to start all over again proving that they're important. Or start all over again trying to get attention, or trying to get more money, or trying to get recognized by their audience, whatever it is. And all they do, they end up with this little empty bucket every morning, and they spend all day filling it with praise that they can find, or the attempt to find it. And then they wake up the next morning and their bucket's empty again. So then their whole life is consumed with seeking external validation for their existence. It's sad, but it's very common. So that's another problem with external success, is you end up as a hungry ghost. We have some Wharton alumni who have fallen prey to this. Raj Rajaratnam recently went to jail for the largest insider trading program of the last century. He's a class of '82, Wharton grad. He was worth over $1 billion when he was indicted and tried and convicted for insider trading. What could that be about? You have $1 billion and you still don't have enough. And he brought the head of McKinsey along with him. So they're both in jail now. The head of McKinsey. I mean, if you go to Wharton and scratch any of the students, and they say, well, where'd you like to work? McKinsey sounds good. I'll work at McKinsey. Well, here's the global head of McKinsey. He's in jail. Hungry ghost. Hungry ghost. Couldn't get enough. And so they now have less freedom than a homeless person you'll meet in the subways of New York. Pretty amazing. Sometimes you pick the wrong pond. I think everybody's entitled to pick the pond that they're in, but sometimes you pick a pond that makes you feel inadequate, less than the best, always questioning your own abilities because everyone around you has more. And that can be very discouraging. So you pick a pond that doesn't actually recognize your talents because there are so many people around you that have more of those. And then you become discouraged, and then you become unmotivated, and then you don't use your talents. So if you took a different pond, smaller pond, different pond, that would use and recognize your unique gifts a little more readily, you'd be more motivated, you'll feel better, you'll achieve more. So you may pick the wrong pond. Sometimes people get to the OK plateau. It's like a bar, the OK plateau. The OK plateau is a place where everything's OK. And the problem with being in a place where everything's OK is that it's hard to change anything. Because if you change anything, it may not be OK. So it's not the excellence plateau. It's not the happiness plateau. It's the OK plateau. So it's a dangerous place to be because you become risk averse. And you spend your life playing defense against opportunities. They keep coming at you and you go, yes, but. And then you stay on the OK plateau another day. It's like having a used car that's just not quite ready to get thrown away yet. And then there's the metaphor problem. And I'm going to have two tests for you before we're concluding. And this is the first one. I think it's important. This is a simple assignment you can take home and think about with your friends or your loved ones. What's your metaphor for the type of achievement you need to be doing? What's your metaphor for the type of achievement you'd like to be known for? This is the usual metaphor for success. It's a ladder, right? And you climb the ladder. One rung at a time, you go from whatever the lowest is to whatever the highest is, or try to go there. Notice something very interesting about this. It's a very lonely ride up that ladder. And also, it suggests that everything's easily defined. So this is the school metaphor. This is the problem with school. If you go through college, you get into the great, go through high school, get into the great college, go into college, get into the great grad school, go to grad school, get in a great firm, get in the firm, get in a great partner in the firm. Then what? You may have realized after a while that what you've really been in is a pie eating contest. And every time you win the contest, the prize is just more pie. That's the problem with this little plan. So is that your metaphor? Sometimes it's really important to realize what you're working with. And a lot of people work with the ladder. It's buried in there. It's like a little programming glitch that got put in very early. Because what's the first thing people want to know when you're at a party with people you don't know? What do you do? And what do you do in America usually means, well, I do something important. Or at least cool. and then there you are on the ladder. And so everybody gets to go, I see you're on rung number 12. Okay, good. Well, I happen to be on 13, So we get to compare ourselves. So, there's something to be, it's a career metaphor. Just realize its limitations. It's a career metaphor. Here's one that I like for myself, but I think the challenge is for you to come up with one of your own. So think about this. This is a pond, and there's been a little plop somewhere in the middle. That's an act. And then it has influence on others. And so one way to measure achievement might be how many positive influences have you had on how many people throughout your life? Because every positive influence you have on one other person, they're going to have some sort of influence on their network. And so how far do your rings extend? That's a different metaphor. Not about climbing. It's a little harder to talk about at the cocktail party. Well, my rings are about this big, But I think it points to a different goal. And that's what I'm thinking about. Maybe your metaphor is a light bulb, and you want to be inventive and create things that make life better. Maybe your metaphor is a hand that's on someone comforting them, and you're measuring success by the people that you can comfort with hand-to-hand person-to-person connections. I don't know. It's up to you. But I think it's important you have a metaphor for what it is you think it's worth achieving before you decide what success is. So that's your homework. Find your own personal metaphor for the kind of achievement you aspire to in your life. You do that, you'll be right on the right path. If at least beginning, your mind will start working on it. Mind loves images. Images are simple, compelling, and memorable. It will start moving that way. All right, if you're going to do success on the happiness trail, then you better find out what happiness is. And that's the problem. Happiness is very hard. 3 kinds of happiness. I work with the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Marty Seligman and his guys, they've studied happiness upside, downside, sideways, every way. And this is basically the conclusions they've come to. You can define happiness as an accumulation of many positive mood states. So when someone says, were you happy today? And you think back, wow, I like that corned beef sandwich. Yeah, I was happy today. Problem with that is they tend to average out. And different people have different genetic set points for the degree of positive moods that they can experience. So some people have a sort of high level of a set point, and their high is really excitingly high, but their low is well above what the person in the next cubicle has as their highest high, because they're down there at a different set point. And for them, life is a question of being realistic. You know, we have research that shows that people who are more pessimistic are actually more accurate at describing the reality. So that's what gets you pessimistic, is you actually see reality the way it is. Dan Gilbert, who's a psychologist at Harvard, we're terrible forecasters of what's going to put us in a positive mood state or a negative one. We stay away from things we fear that wouldn't make us miserable, and we try to get the things that actually don't make us very happy. And so it just turns out that way. We're just bad at forecasting the future when it comes to our own moods. So if you run your life predicting that you're going to be happy, and so you do this, that, and the other, you're always going to end up about half the time going, didn't make me happy. You know, rip off, want my money back. But it's not reality's fault. It's your fault. It's a bad way to measure what to do. It's a flawed compass you're using. Another way to think about it is they're sort of retrospective evaluations. Were you happy when you were at Microsoft? You know, this 20 years later, you're looking back, you know, from your penthouse suite, having started your own company and everything's working great. Were you happy at Microsoft? Well, if you're in a good mood when you ask the question, you'll probably say you were a little happier than if you're in a bad mood when you ask the question. So our current mood affects our memories of the past in a huge way. And if that's the case, how flawed is that as a measure? Because I could just give you a chocolate chip cookie if you like chocolate chip cookies, and you'll have a much rosier view of whatever it is I'm asking you about. Not a reliable metric. And then we tend to emphasize peaks and ends more than the rest. So you may have a net happiness, you know, total happiness experience at 3 out of 10. But during that period of time, the 20 years you were at Microsoft, there was a time when you were a 10, and near the very end, it got good again. And so you were a 10 again. When you look back, you won't average 2 10s against 3s. You'll say, it was probably an 8, because you're just going to focus on those 2 points and extrapolate from those to the rest. It's a very flawed cognitive process. And then finally, there's this, which I recommend. We should all have lots of deep happiness. Names for this include joy. This is a Aristotelian term, eudaimonia, which means thriving, flourishing. Simcha is a Hebrew term. Normally means ordinary happiness, like, you know, go to a wedding, be happy. But a rabbi that one of my students brought to my attention once defined it this way. Simcha is the feeling that comes when you're doing what you should be doing. The feeling that comes when you're doing what you should be doing. Now that may be the feeling that comes when you're sitting with someone who needs comfort, or when you take time out of your day to work on something that's actually very difficult but deeply satisfying to you. That's not happiness like smiley face. Very often it's happiness in a way that follows suffering, sacrifice, experiences where you're devoted to a purpose larger than your own, survival or your own positive moods. So that's worthwhile, but it doesn't really sound like happy. It's something else. And one more problem with this, it's hard to arrange. You can't go, well, I'm going to spend the next month visiting people in hospitals and I'll get a lot of deep happiness. Well, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Gilbert's rule still applies. You're not going to get what you expect. Hawthorne once said, this kind of happiness is like a butterfly. If you try to catch a butterfly with your hands, very hard. But if you sit still, sometimes a butterfly will come and light on your shoulder. So sometimes you get this by a gift of grace. And you only notice it if you're quiet enough to see it. You have to be there on the beach on that random morning when you got up too early because you couldn't sleep, and you walk out and there's a sunrise and it just happened. You didn't get up to go find because if you do, it won't be there. So great concept, but you have to just learn to be still. All right. So now let's see. I got one more thing, and then we've got your 6 lives exercise. This is my second challenge to you. First was find your metaphor. What is it you're trying to achieve? This is find your definition of happiness, since there isn't any. A guy came up in a seminar I was attending at Wharton, and it was a big, maybe 12, 15 people, big room, and they were doing a lecture on income and happiness, the relationship between income levels and happiness. And there was all these data about Bhutan and Mongolia and stuff. And about right before it's getting ready to start, this man walks in who's obviously not a member of the Wharton faculty. He's a working class guy with a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and rough hands, sat down right next to me at the end of the table. And our seminars are open to the public, so sometimes people come in. We always wonder what they might say, because you never know, who's going to come in. But anyway, the lecture went on, and the guy finished, and someone asked a question about the regression analysis on the Bhutan data set, and he happily answered that, And then this guy raised his hand. And everybody sort of held their breath. And he said, excuse me, I'm just a member of the public, but you seem to be talking about happiness and money. And he said, I don't see how happiness has anything to do with money. He said, as near as I can tell, happiness is just 3 things: good health, meaningful work, and love. You have that, you're happy. And there was this dead silence. And it was very, like the presenter kind of went, well, thank you. And then someone else said, about that regression analysis on the Bhutan data set. And everything kind of went like water over sand. And he got up and wandered off and went out the door. Now, I was sitting there and I thought to myself, my goodness, God has sent an angel to the Wharton School to tell us the meaning of life, and nobody listened. I mean, isn't that interesting? It was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase meaningful work when he said it. So I thought, let's find out what that is. That looks good. But I don't think that that's actually true for any of us. I mean, good health may be the beginning of happiness, but you can have some bad health and still have days when you're happy. Meaningful work, whatever it is something that you may have outside of your job that pays you, and there's another thing you're doing that's your meaningful work. So it's hard to know whether it's a requirement that you have it as a 9-to-5 part of your life. And love comes and goes. You lose a loved one. Doesn't mean you can never be happy again. It just means that you have some sadness. So I don't know that that's actually the last word on the subject, but I would give you this challenge. If you're going to say success is happiness, you have to define it. And I call him the wise angel. I think the wise angel had a pretty good definition. And I gave him credit for having thought enough about life to have come up with it. And they shared it with us, and no one listened. But I listened, so I'm telling you. And finally, if you're going to succeed, I think it's important to be unhappy sometimes. I mean, that's where we get injustice, and so we have programs to improve it. That's where we get poverty, and we're unhappy about the poverty, and we try to change it. That's where we have relationships that aren't working, and we take steps to fix them. So if you're constantly in denial about the things you're unhappy about, then you're going to end up piling all this stuff on top of yourself, and you collapse at one point. So be dissatisfied. Use them as motivations. Be unhappy. Find out why you're unhappy. Work from that. Don't just follow this pursuit of happiness. I think Jefferson should have said life, liberty, and the pursuit of dissatisfaction. That would have given us all much more to work with. All right, so here's the 6 lives, and I'm going to quick ask for a show of hands, and then I'll wrap up and we'll get some Q&A here. So there's 6 lives, and some people rank them number 1, some 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm just going to ask you to sort of raise hands, and we'll do a very brief survey to see what the numbers are for number 1 and number 6. That's the separation of this. See if we all agree about the same thing. So the wealthy investor, the guy who makes a lot of money and has political causes that he supports. Anybody rank the wealthy investor number 1? Hands up for number 1. Okay, about 4 of you. Number 6. Quite a few more, okay. All right, but we have some on each side. So some 1, some 6. People like the wealthy investors' variety, autonomy, options. There are a lot of things to be said for having that kind of control over your life and the willingness to exert yourself and have influence. People don't like the wealthy investor because he has no family, he has no partner, he doesn't really have a way of connecting emotionally with others. It seems like he's on a lonely trip, and some people find that to be very painful as a choice for a definition of success. But people have different ideas about this. The banker. Anybody pick the banker as number 1? Okay, so we have about maybe 10 of you, 11. Pick the banker. Number 6 for the banker. About the same number, maybe a few less. All right, people who pick the banker often respect her choices. I mean, here's a woman who's defending her life choices against a lot of people who are saying, you ought to be dissatisfied with your life. And she's saying, no, I've chosen my life. Her devotion to her child, her loyalty to her company, to her mission at work, her success in the latter sense there, all of that suggests a person who's not living a selfish life. And a one that she's chosen, and that's very admirable to some. People pick at number 6 sometimes because it looks like a very painful life in some ways. I mean, she's got a lot of time devoted to this child, and not sure that that would be the way you'd want to spend your time, and she's alone. Like the wealthy investor, she doesn't have a partner. It doesn't seem to be working out with the love side, although she has a great deal of love for her child. It seems incomplete to some other people, so they pick it lower. Tennis pro, number 1. Anybody pick the tennis pro, number 1? Oh, just one person. Excellent. Well, congratulations on your choice. Tennis pro number 6. Okay, a few more. People pick the tennis pro. I mean, in different audiences, I have this reversal of that dynamic. Tennis pro has some appealing things. She's very accomplished. She's been on the front of the tennis magazine. She's very good at what she does. She is an individual accomplisher, so she earned the right to do this on her own merits. There's no complications about who gets the credit. She has a family. She's gotten past the possible pain of not being able to have children and adopted them, so she's taking control of her life in that respect. She's giving back to the community. She has a nonprofit she works with to bring tennis to kids with lower incomes and less opportunity. All that sounds pretty good. People pick against this life at number 6, often because she doesn't have work-life balance quite set right. She doesn't have time for those kids she's adopted. It's a hard road out there in the circuit. It looks like she's sort of sweating it a bit. And some people wonder if she chose this life. Someone who's been playing tennis since they were 5, did they really choose this? Or is this something their parent or one or parent said, up every morning, drill, 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 serve, 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 volley, volley, volley. And it just turns out she's good at it. But it isn't actually something that excites her passion. If any of you have read Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open, he's obviously a world-class tennis player. It starts with the first 3 words are, I hate tennis, because his father was a monster who drilled him beyond endurance. And that's, of course, why he got to be a great tennis player. But he really hated the game. And finally put it together later in life when he married Steffi and started doing some other things. Nonprofit leader. Anybody pick the nonprofit leader number 1? Oh, quite a few. Okay. Number 6 for the nonprofit leader. A few of you. People pick number 1 for the nonprofit leader often respect his or her willingness to sort of take accomplishments in one career, repurpose them to a new direction. So they're moving in a more purpose-filled direction for another stage of their career. That looks attractive. They have a family. They're bringing them along. They're going to expose them to this new culture in Africa. That could look exciting. I moved around a lot when I was a kid. That doesn't show any fear for me. It was normal for me. I would assume those kids will get with a program. But people sometimes see that life and go, oh, I see a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of Africa when this family lands in Africa. Because those kids are not going to like it. No social media, no friends, not a happy crew. And if that's the case, maybe this parent is really a dictator and not really a parent who's compassionate and caring. So they see that as being an unsuccessful choice. So notice what you're doing with each of these lives. You're interpolating from your own fears, hopes, experience to read into this what you read into it. I think that's important to note because it's true that they're different, but it's also true those are your fears. Those are your experiences. And when you get to nodal points, unconsciously, that's some of the stuff that you're using to choose this or that. So it's important to kind of be aware of those metrics. The teacher, anybody pick the teacher number 1? Okay, excellent, about 10 or 12. Teacher number 6. All right, fewer. People who like the teacher generally like the idea of, this pond thing. There's this person showing ripples with their immediate community. They love to bring out excellence in others. They're being quite good at it. They've got award-winning science high school students. And they have a family too. People who pick against this one often fear that one nick, there's a child who doesn't speak to the family anymore. And sometimes people kind of infer, wait a minute, if this person is such a great high school teacher, how come she can't keep her own family going? And that's sort of a problem if you think about it that way. And that looks really like a dark place to go. I myself picked the teacher as my number 1 life out of this exercise, but not just because I happen to be a teacher. This is obvious. But I like the pond thing. I like the bringing out the best in others part. And I was her child. And I came home. So I know that it works out sometimes. And so it doesn't have that fear for me. Finally, the stonemason. Anybody pick the stonemason number 1? Oh, quite a few. Interesting. Stonemason number 6. A couple of you. Okay. High picks for the stonemason often come from a sense of his autonomy, his craftsmanship, his control over what he's doing. His family is completely integrated with his life. He's building his children's homes. Takes great pride in what he does, both for them and for his work. So this looks like the Zen master of the 6. But some people read this life and go, boring, boring, boring. I mean, what effect is he having on anyone outside his family? And he's not even on the cover of Stonemason Weekly, And people honestly feel this sort of, what? I want my life to have a little bit more, happening out there besides this stonemason thing. So it's not a literal. The stonemason is anyone who likes a kind of craft approach to their work that they can control, and that's rare in our workplace. So I see a lot of people picking the stonemason because they're lacking that sense of completion on things that they do and control over things they do. And in our world, that's rare, and people really would like to have more of it. And so we vote for that life. So just as a final thing, and then we have a few minutes for questions. If you had to pick one of these lives for your only child, assume your only child is just a sort of average child without a lot of aptitudes displayed yet. Sometimes when I ask it that way, people change their votes. One and only one life for the only child you're going to leave in this world. Which one would you pick? And very often people move a little more to a kind of external internal balance with a few less risks. Because even the stonemason's life, money is sometimes a problem, he says. Some people get a little worried about that when they think, our only child, we're going to endow this life to this person where there's money is a problem? Not sure. So I throw that one out as a final note to you because I think the choice you would make for your only child is probably the choice you would make for yourself if you actually had to take the path of one of these 6 and the balance that they're showing. And I think that's important to know because that's the action value that you're using to make real choices. Not just the ideal, the admirable, the thing that you admire, but the thing you would do if you had to do it. So I think getting at that level is kind of important. Okay, we got a few minutes for questions or comments. Anybody got anything they want to throw at me? The professor is here. Yes?
Any of your courses or seminars online?
The course online. Yeah, I've been asked about that. I'll tell you, I haven't put it online. It's not because I'm trying to hide it. I put a book out after all. But the trouble is, I find the online teaching environment to be rarely one way. And so for me to just sort of sit in front of a camera and talk and then have 25, 30,000 people out there isn't the kind of ripples that I'm spending time teaching. I like to spend time teaching people I know. And Parajat can tell you that means a lot of interaction, a lot of discussion, a lot of knowledge about who they really are to be helpful. Because my real goal is to try to help, not just to influence, to be known. So I haven't, but maybe someday they'll change the online environment. You guys will invent a new way to make it interactive in a way that's compelling. Yes.
Knowing what you know now, looking back on your life, would you have made different choices?
That's a great question.
What's the question?
The question is, knowing what I know now and looking back on my life, would I have made different choices? You got to remember that the big moment for me wasn't a choice. It was an outside force that hit me like a hurricane. And so I was completely turned upside down and my identity was taken away. I had to make a choice, and I made the right choice on that. That is, I chose an anti-war stance that I still maintain. I led part of the team that protested the first Iraq invasion that took place back in the 90s. I could see the train coming. It was an old train. I knew it well. And there was nothing we could do to stop it, but we stood up and waved the flag and said, no, not again, and it just went right over us again. But I still maintain the rightness of that position. But as far as my own life is concerned, I am a big proponent of trial and error rather than choice, cause, effect. I think what you do is you make choices that put you in different places, and then life happens. And then you make new choices based on the options that life provides at that next stage. And you can't predict what the next stage is actually going to be. So I just like to start going from the inside out, try to maximize your capabilities so that you continue to get better at what you do and achieve what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's the best you can do. I kept journals while I was traveling those 2 years. So I had this great big stack of these very introspective journals. And at one point, the question, what should I do, was big question. I used to write about that a lot. And at one point, I came to the insight, abstractly, I want to be a teacher. This is before I had the out-of-body experience, and I realized I really wanted to be one. And so when I wrote it down, I said, okay, I want to be a teacher. What are the things I could teach, and what are the things I could never teach? And I could teach English literature, history, poetry. And the top of the list of things I could never teach, business. Here I am. So I was smart enough, and I'm married to someone who's smart enough. I married my college sweetheart, who was also there, and she had a few adventures of her own, but we connected with each other after I came home again. And she knows me well enough to know that when the opportunity to teach at Wharton came, I should take it. So it's not always choice, but it is response and wise responses. Anybody else? Yeah.
Any advice for someone just about to go into their last year of college?
Yes. Other than read Springboard. I think you should be taking things you really enjoy and not just things that you think are going to look good in your resume. It's the last chance you're only going to be a senior in college once. Take an acting class, take whatever it is you like to do. And then I think you ought to look at the next stage of life more as a postgraduate fellowship in life and not as the beginning of a career. And even if for a couple of years you do something else, it might be travel, it might be work on a cruise ship, it might be go to work for some group in Asia or something. Not a career choice, an educational choice, so that you maximize your ability to respond to the world around you. Open the big gate and let the information in. I think that's the best advice I would give. Yeah.
You talked about deep happiness, and you talked about sometimes it takes being still to be able to tap into that. Does that go along with kind of like meditation and getting into that still place to kind of really increase that deep happiness and increase those experiences?
I wouldn't say it has to be meditation. I think some people are hyperactive people, and so for them, they have to get really, really, really active, and then they can be quiet. And if you try to tell them meditate, they just sit in the meditation and go, like this. So I would say whatever it takes for you to be at a place mentally where you're open, where you're aware, where you're noticing what's happening around you. Even if it's running, you might be open, aware, noticing what's happening. You might be in motion as you have that state of mind. So however you achieve that state of mind, without drugs, I think that's the way to do it. So it's like everything else. It's your own, you have to sort of assess yourself. For me, quiet meditation, I'm an introvert, basically. I like to spend time alone. I don't like big crowds. I love being with you guys, but if this were a social event and we had to all mix, I would go to a corner and find one of you and just talk to that one person the whole time. So I think everybody's got to find their own kind of thing. And for me, it was meditation. Yeah.
I just have the feeling that if the point is to define success in your own terms, then isn't such an exercise where we're looking at different people, rating their success, and we're just inherently establishing this model where we're qualifying people's success, taking us back to the same tainted vision of defining success in terms of what other people see?
Well, I gave you this exercise, and it's an impossible exercise because I asked you to judge 6 lives. But the reason I gave it to you was not to decide whether you think they are successful. The reason I gave it to you is because those criteria are implicit in your mind about yourself, and that's what's activating those choices. So, I mean, there's no way to separate the social inputs from the inner world. We are social creatures, and we are the product of social conditioning and social information. No way to separate it. But you can be more aware of it, just like you can be aware of hunger. And so once you become aware of hunger, you don't have to eat as much because now you're not fearing hunger. Oh, that's hunger. Okay, happens sometimes during the day. And so, a lot of people eat just to keep the feeling of hunger away, and they never are aware that it's the hunger that's motivating the eating. You get aware of hunger as a feeling, you can do something with it. So I think that this compulsion to achieve, or to achieve status, or to get fame, or increase your wealth, or whatever, are impulses. And once you're aware of them, then you become able to sort of judge, well, is this one I ought to follow, or should I just sort of move this one down the road and see if I can find something that gives me more satisfaction when I achieve it? A lot of people wake up often in the week and they go, wow, I just achieved the XYZ, and then they say to themselves, but why do I feel so empty? Why am I not excited the day after that about it? And that's because they've been acting on these impulses that are unconscious. They might be trying to please their family, or trying to beat a brother, or trying to whatever, and they've forgotten all the whys, and all they do is the do's, but they wake up and they don't understand why they've been doing it. And so that it lacks the savor of something you genuinely understand. So I think it's a great question. I don't think you can ever pull the two apart, but you can adopt an attitude about them that gives you a little more perspective and choice about what to do. Yeah?
Professor, quick question. Well, maybe not so quick. So you spoke about maximizing your ability to respond to the world around you, and also inherently experiencing a set of unhappiness or dissatisfaction. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, there's when one is in a point of life where they're not as happy as they would like, or they realize that perhaps what they're doing is not their final calling, is it worth, and for how long possibly, once you remain in that position, under the notion that there's probably a lot to learn, there's probably a lot more to pick up, or to learn more about said unhappiness, or what really is the core driver of it. So I don't know if the juxtaposition of the two is something that you've thought about or written about.
Certainly something I thought about. I mean, the question is, one of the things that keeps people from taking this journey is the fear that it'll never end. It'll never end. It's going to end up with me being dysfunctional and unable to achieve anything, and depressed and sad and lonely and yuck. So why not stay on the OK plateau? And I've got a number for you. 32,850 is the number of days you get to live if you're lucky enough to live to be 90. Now, if that's it, that's the quantity. There's no more than that for most people. So how do you want to spend them? I say, my theory is you should go all in. That is, be willing to face the fear, be willing to face the uncertainty, be willing to, especially at your age, be willing to open the door to finding about yourself. This is not about finding about a career. This is not about discovering you have an aptitude for programming. This is about discovering what it is that motivates and moves and causes you to behave. And if it does, I'm for therapy if that's the way it goes. That's a direction it needs to take to figure out, the emotional core that's actually bubbling under there. I just think if you don't do that, you're always the effect of these things that aren't under your control, and then you die. And you were just the effect of some disease. And this doesn't seem worthy to me. So I think it's worth the roll the dice. Find yourself. All right, I think it's about time to wrap it up. I see Amy coming up here. So.
Because there is someone online who suggested doing a discussion group based on the book.
Oh, excellent.
So if you're interested, please send the alias email and we'll connect you with them.
Let me, I'll conclude with this thought, with that motivating statement. The book that is back there has an appendix, which I created based on feedback from the first publication back in August, which is a reader's guide. And there are 8 session guides, and they have questions that a group can talk about as far as the exercises and assessments, topics to discuss. And so there are 8 little sessions, all designed to provoke you into asking the right kinds of questions and facilitating your own growth. So the book has that all built in. Thank you. Thank you, Amy.